Hello there, dear loving soul. Welcome back to part 2 of the video series on loving newbies at work. And let's just jump straight into the practical tips using the holy trinity of love in my world, which is thinking love, speaking love, and doing love. And if we consider the first one, which is thinking love, I'm a big believer in that if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So from a thinking perspective, I think it's important to come up with a plan or give some consideration to what it is that you're going to do individually or as a team in order to make the new team member feel valued and appreciated and welcomed. And quite frankly, that journey can begin, that planning can begin before the person's start date, right? And it's very important to come up with a bit of a document, say a 1 or 2 pager that you can give to the new person on their first day at work, setting out some principles or cultural insights about the organization as well as your team, and some things that you do or some things that you don't do, your expectations, any unwritten rules, any contact persons, key contact persons, who does what and why, just in order to give a little bit of a resource to that person, that new team member, so that they can read in their own time and to give them pretty much a snapshot of what the team's all about. I think that would be helpful. And the other thing about during this thinking love stage, it's all about planning perhaps a team activity that one can do, 1 or 2 or 3, be that a welcome cake or welcome morning tea for the new team member, going out for a coffee as an example. So make sure that it's in everybody's calendar, to make sure everybody knows in advance and can manage their calendars for that particular week when the new person starts their journey in your team. Now that's some of the things, so thinking, planning in advance, taking some steps ahead for the benefit of that new person. Now, throughout the first few weeks and the month, when it comes to thinking love, there's a couple of things that one can do, which is observe the new person, right? And consider some suggestions or practical tips or options that one can do in order to make sure that the help that new person receives is fit for purpose. Because as I mentioned at the part 1, one of the things that happens is this information asymmetry between you and the other person. Planet Earth, the school of Planet Earth, it's all about the separation or illusion of separation. So of course you don't know that person's skills, their thoughts, their previous work experience, and so it becomes a bit of a task on you to figure out what that person needs best at a particular point in time. And so obviously observation is something that you will need, and then consideration of some suggestions, tips, and some things that you can do or somebody else within the team or the organization might be able to do in order to make that person's life a little bit easier and more supported. Now, check-ins are quite important. So part of the consideration is, when is that next check-in, 1-to-1 as an example, or is it team, best suitable for that person, in order to really have a lovely conversation with them as to the good, the bad, and the ugly, what's working, what hasn't been working, or what areas of learning or development and help do they require. And the last thing I wanted to mention about thinking love aspect, I encourage people to pray. I think prayer is an act of love in itself. So if you are struggling and you're not sure about what is it that you can do in order to best help a person within their new work environment, just pray for it. Address your spirit guides, your guardian angels or guardian asna, whoever you might believe in. Address them to give you some physical signs or some thoughts or physical signs as to what is it that you can do next in order to help that person, and just trust in the universe. I'm sure the answer will arrive in a variety and bunch of ways, and just go for it. And something that before we go into speaking love, I am all about us all figuring out what our strengths are. And so when it comes to actually helping another person, you don't really have to go out of your way completely, breaking your back, so to speak, in order to help somebody. just have a think about what your strengths are, what your role is. You can do this whether you are the most junior person or you're the most senior person within a team. Anybody can help, and any kind of assistance, even a kind word, a supportive word, would be just as helpful for that newbie. So it's just a matter of you figuring out what your strengths are, what your context is, and then applying yourself for the benefit of that other person. So with that in mind, we talked about words of encouragement, so let's talk about speaking love. You know, social integration is proven to actually help somebody join into a new group or a community. So part of the challenge that a newbie will be experiencing is not knowing other people, right? Not knowing their faces, not knowing what they do, what their names are, or, you know, even basics like that. So if you are able to, through your speaking love, through communication, to assist them with social integration, that would be a fantastic thing that you can do. And the communication can come in a variety of shapes and forms. One-to-one, you may choose to have some one-to-one time, talking to the person, getting to know them, treating them like a new friend, like that you've just met, asking where they come from, what their previous work experience has been like, what their studies are like. It could be a consideration of the fact that they may have even migrated or immigrated from their place of home to the place where you're working in order to secure this job. So talk about that immigration or migration experience if that's something that applies. Perhaps they might need some help and assistance with the fact that they've just immigrated. So I might just link down below a few links to a video series I did on immigration, because that might be helpful. So apart from that one-to-one conversation, there might be an opportunity for a team discussion, right? A team welcome. Like I mentioned before, a morning tea or a lunch or a cake, anything of that sort, even as little as going out for a tea or coffee, will be just as fruitful and helpful to help with that social integration aspect. And as the time goes by, do not underestimate the power of actually having a communication with others around the team. Just checking in as to what others may have done in order to make the new person welcome. If anything, if they haven't, that might be an opportunity to encourage or inspire others to have, one-to-one chats or one-to-one coffees, or to do something as a group. And likewise, to even have a chat about, some of the work-related challenges or role-related challenges. Is there something that we can get this person involved in? What sort of projects are on the go? What sort of work is on the go? How can we make this newbie feel part of our team by getting them involved, and encouraging and inspiring others to actually reach out directly to the person to go and get them involved in whatever it is that your team is doing. And I think a part of the message that I wanted to relay is that proactivity. So think about the newbie, right? A lot of the people, even the biggest extroverts, might feel at times that they're shy or timid or not just encouraged enough or not courageous enough to go and speak to people, right, to ask for help or assistance. So if you see somebody new, be the proactive person, be the bigger person, be the loving person, to go out and say, what kind of help do you want? Do you know where such and such person is, or such and such department is? Because they might not know their office surroundings or the place of work, where the different people are, who the different people are. Likewise, the physical surroundings of the environment, where the nearest coffee shop is, as an example. So just having those little interactions would give them a huge, I think, boost of morale. And next time they might be more encouraged to actually ask you for help with something that actually truly matters to them. And so something else that is obviously quite important to the role that the individual is performing, and that's having an open communication approach, so that the newbie feels like they can talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, so a safe environment. So it comes, in my experience, it's very important for the more senior members of the team, be that your managers or the bosses, to truly show their leadership qualities and encouraging to speak freely and know that it is a safe environment to do so. There are no negative repercussions or consequences for speaking one's truth, for speaking from the heart, and doing so obviously in a kind, polite manner, in order to know that, you know, what's actually working and what's not working. Doing a bit of a SWOT analysis, you know, the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, and the threats, as to what the experience has been like for the newbie during the first few weeks or the months of that time, because all those suggestions, you know, can actually help for the next person that will be joining the team in whatever the time frame. Because if you can really make that initial phase of one's life as comfortable and supportive and as inclusive as possible, then it is more likely that the new person will be more motivated to come to work, be more motivated to be as productive as they can be. They'll be more motivated to be working collaboratively with the team and actually helping other new people who join the team in due course, and sharing, you know, their story, sharing their experiences, and ultimately everyone kind of benefits. It's an example of how one can multiply the love, right? Isn't if you've created a really awesome environment for the person who's just started, then say in 6 months' time, in a year's time, or, you know, whatever the time frame, it's just an example, but they will be then more encouraged to help other new starters within the team. And as an example of a great multiplication of love. And yeah, I think I might just move on to the doing love, because there's a lot that one can do. And apologies again for the noise outside. There's some construction works that are happening. So one of the doing love bits, and I suspect this can go back to the thinking love as well, when we discussed planning in advance of the new person starting a particular role. And that's considering, could there be a buddy or a mentor that can be assigned to the new starter in order to assist them throughout their journey. So there's a buddy or mentor whose role it is effectively to have the one-to-one chats, coffees, check-ins, in order to help with that social inclusion part, but also on a more technical level, you know, the role that they're doing, they might be that initial go-to person whenever the new starter, the newbie, might have a technical related question as to how do you go about doing a particular job. So, you know, considering and assigning a buddy or mentor would be quite useful and helpful, and it gives that assigned buddy or mentor an ability to actually show off their or improve their own leadership skills, right? Mentoring skills. There's a lot that goes with that role, and it's a lovely and it's an honouring role, in my opinion, to be a buddy or mentor. So something we've discussed about is coming up with some written rules or policies. You know, many organisations, employers might already have those in place, so it might be a matter of showing the newbie where to find those policies and or printing them out for them, you know, if just like a physical booklet, to make sure that the newbie can, at their own time, read through these, understand what the mission is, what the values of the organisation are, what are some things to be mindful of. And likewise, don't forget about the unwritten rules as well, or they can be informal bits and bobs that a team does, in like a mini mission statement, or just some, you know, go-to rules. And you might, you know, there's a reason why they're unwritten rules, but if it's something that you've noticed your team does quite on a regular, as an example, you know, a coffee every week on a particular day, or you might have a WIP meeting on every day or certain days, you may have some unwritten rules as to your expectations of customer behavior, what you do and what you don't. There might be some internal rules between departments, you know, so like internal rules between teams and other departments. All those bits and bobs, even though they're more informal, it might actually play to write those down, but in an informal way. It doesn't have to be like a long list of things, but even like a one-pager might be helpful in order to ensure that everybody's living up to those unwritten rules. Now, a workspace, so that's something that was on my list as well. I'm just saying, it's sometimes technology fails us, even phones fail us, computers, laptops, software, whatever. And so setting up a person's place of work, be it their desk, or if you're driving around, you work in vehicles, their vehicle, or any other place of work, wherever you might be on a construction site. You might have a locker that a person can store where their bits and bobs. So just showing them their space, somewhere where they can go to and just kind of have their me time or work time, but also the physical surroundings as to where the job is done, how it's done, why it's done that way, where things are at, the smallest of things like stationery bays or reception or bathrooms, lunchroom, staff room, all things like that. That physical environment is incredibly important, and the more quicker the newbie can familiarize themselves with the physical environment, the more likely they are to actually feel more settled in and comfortable to perform, to be a productive team member. Now, the other bit that I wanted to touch on just before I wrap up part 2, it's all about, it is a little bit more drilled down into the specific role. So you can do a lot of things, and I don't want to list the spectrum of jobs and careers and roles out there, but with every single job there might be resources or guidelines, checklists, presentations, training documents that might be available in order to help one do their job. So kind of like a folder of resources, somewhere where you can tap into in order to manage the organization's knowledge or your team's knowledge as to how you go about doing your job. The most little things help, details help, and if there is such a thing in your team, please show to your team, your newbie, where to find that, how to use it, when it's most relevant, and perhaps even the top 10 things that they could expect to be using within their first month or their first quarter of their job. Point those things out to them, show it to them. And I guess the part of it which is quite useful, well, if you don't have that kind of folder or a knowledge management system, well, perhaps part of the thinking of love is are you doing some work in advance before the new starter begins? Maybe there's a couple of resources that you or your team can come up with in order to make sure that when the new starter kicks off, they've got something that they can turn to in order to assist them during their first few weeks, to make sure that they feel like they're doing their job to the best of their ability and they feel like a productive new team member. So I'm going to wrap up part 2 there, my friends. Let's jump into part 3 to receive some messages from the spirit world. Click on the link down below in part 3 and I will see you shortly for those.